Let's talk about tattoo needles. I'm gonna do a two-part video discussing all the differences and configurations of tattoo needles. In this video, I'm gonna talk about the needles. In the second video, I'm gonna show examples of how I use my needles. My name is Ryan Methric. I'm also known as rm.ink on Instagram. Now, this is designed for the beginner tattoo artist. I'm gonna make this really simple. I know it's a lot to take in with tattoo needles, but I'm gonna make this as simple as possible, but yet give you the most information that you can absorb. Stay tuned also to the end of the video. I'm gonna show you the personal needle configurations and brands that I use, and I'm going to talk about why I use them. First, we're going to start off with liners. Now, as you can guess, lining needles are used for lining. Now, the most common size lining needles are usually 3 liners to around 14 liners. Now, what does the number mean? The number is the number of needles in your liner. Usually a liner is a few needles grouped up into a point, almost like a sharp pencil, and that creates your liner. So a 3 liner has 3 needles in that point, and a 14 liner has 14 needles condensed in that point. Now, the larger the amount of needles you have, the larger the lines you can pull, thicker lines, and the less amount of needles you have, the thinner the line will be. Now, what else can liners be used for? Other than just line work, you can do other techniques. You can do stippling, which is a bunch of groups of dots of ink to create gradations, or you can also just straight shade with a liner. I myself use liners for shading, but we'll talk about that later. Now, the next type of needle I want to talk about is called a round shader. Now, it's very similar to a liner. It's a group of needles pointed up in a stack like this, like a pencil, but think of it more like a blunt pencil. Think of a liner being a sharp pencil and a round shader being a blunt pencil. Round shaders also come in a variety of sizes, the most popular probably being around a 7 to 14 again, and it's used for mainly small concentrated areas of solid black fill. You can do color with it, you can shade with them a little bit. It's a little bit tricky, but it can be done, and you can also line with them. You can do bold lines with a round shader. Now, the next type of needle is a huge workhorse in the tattoo industry. Most of you have heard the name, even if you don't know what it means, and that is the mag shader. Now, the mag is 2 rows of needles flat. They're like this, and they stack over top of each other. It almost simulates what a paintbrush would be in the tattoo industry. Now, there's different sizes of mags once again. The most common are probably between 5 mag all the way up to a 27. There are larger sizes that artists use depending on the size of the tattoo they're doing or their personal style. Now, there's 2 main types of mag needles that we have to talk about. The first type are straight edge mags. They're the traditional mags, which means the needles that stack like this, they're completely flat across and create an edge, almost like a square. Now, those you can also use for lining. You can sculpt with them. You can dig in with the corner and line and shade and sculpt. And the second type of mag, which I feel like nowadays is becoming more common because it causes less damage to the skin, is the curved mag. It's still stacked like this, but instead of going straight across, the needles create a curve. So that way, when you turn the needle, you can get softer blend outs and you're not digging into the skin as much as the flats. Now, I know different artists use different things. I've seen artists do really good work with the straight edge flat mags, and I've seen artists do really good work with the curved or round mags. Now, let's talk about something a little more advanced. You might have heard the term Bugpin before. What does Bugpin mean? Well, let's just take a liner, for example. Let's dissect this. So let's say we have a 9 liner. That means we have 9 little needles stacked together into a sharp point. Now, what is a Bugpin? A Bugpin is how thick each individual needle is in that grouping. So the standard size needle is size 12. That's how thick each individual needle is. The most common size of Bugpin is a 10, and then it goes down to 8, each one getting thinner and thinner. Now, what's the benefit of using Bugpins? Well, Bugpins create smaller holes, which means less trauma to the skin, but you have to generally adjust for that by using a slower hand speed. Also, let's talk about the taper. You can change the taper of individual needles. Now, the taper is the point. Think of the standard point like this. The longer the taper the point is. Once again, creating smaller holes, and you can even do wider tapers. If you're new to tattooing, I honestly wouldn't worry about this stuff yet. I would just start off with the standard 12 size needles. You're probably not going to notice the differences until you get more experience tattooing because it's a very slight feel or a very slight nuance. And really good artists, honestly, can tattoo with any type of needle configuration. This gets more into branching out and really fine-tuning your craft. There's a few other different types of needle configurations. You can get hollow needles, which are round shaders or liner, but they're missing the center needles. And the idea is to create more ink flow for heavy, bold, traditional lining. And there's also something called texture needles. And each individual needle barb has a little bit of texture on it. Once again, the idea is to create more ink flow going into the skin. But those are advanced needles. Don't worry about those yet if you're just starting. Now let's talk about what I personally use for all my tattoos. I use a 5 liner Bugpin, that's a 10 gauge. I use a 7 round shader 12 standard gauge, and I use an 11 curved mag 12 standard gauge. Let's talk about the curved mag first. So I use the curved mag to create softer edges and blends so I don't have the sharp edge of the needle. And I use the 12 standard gauge because personally I have a little bit of a fast hand, so I have trouble packing solid black in with the bug pins with the smaller holes. It slows me down personally a little bit. So I like 11 curved mags. Sometimes I'll use larger mags like 19 if I'm doing a huge piece, or if it's solid color and I just want to pack a little bit quicker. For my round shader, I use primarily a 7 round shader, standard 12. I use this for a variety of reasons. I use it for solid black fill. Anything from 1 inch to 2 inches, I'll solid black fill that. I feel like if you do solid black with a 7 round shader, generally it gets a little bit darker than using a mag because it's so concentrated in those areas. Another thing I use my round shader for is lining. I do primarily 80% of all my lining with a 7 round shader. And now my workhorse needle is the Bugpin 10 gauge 5 liner. Now I use this for a ton of stuff. I use this for texturing, I use this for small delicate line work, and mainly I use it for shading. I start off with a 5 round shader on all my black and gray and color tattoos, and I shade the general tones with it, and then I go back with the curved mag at the end and blend it and smooth it all out. Now the next video in this series, I'm going to show you the techniques of how I use and implement these needles, but this one was just to get you more familiarized with the types of needles and what's out there. What I would do is I would select 4 or 5 needles and get really good with those. I personally would rather be great with 5 needles than mediocre with 15 different configurations. Make sure you hit the bell and subscribe to the channel. I want everybody to get better at tattooing. Check me out on Instagram. I'm rm.ink. If you have any questions at all, no matter what it is, feel free to send me a DM on Instagram and I'll try my best to answer anything that you have. Throw it at me.